the great Marvin Gaye.
Marvin Gaye was one of the most important artists in the history of popular music.
Marvin Gaye kept putting out hits. I heard it through the grapevine. Ended up selling over 4 million copies.
Sexual Healing, which will become the biggest song of his career.
Unfortunately, Marvin Gaye had a bad habit of indulging in drugs. And as he became more powerful, people were afraid to stop him.
The murder of Marvin Gaye by his own father is one of the greatest tragedies in the history of pop music, especially because Marvin Gaye's career was completely on the rise.
Marvin Gaye, he didn't have a will.
What he left was millions of dollars in debt.
29 years after Marvin Gaye passes away, the real estate war begins.
It was a huge hit. So Pharrell, T.I., Robin Thicke, they're making millions off this
The
song.
Marvin Gaye estate absolutely shocked the music industry.
This lawsuit causes every major musician or artist to essentially freak out.
The blurred lines verdict was history-making.
There was a lot of tension. Everyone wanted to know what was going to happen.
When a celebrity checks out, there's no shortage of people ready to cash in. There's a ton of money to be made on the backs of dead celebrities, and with millions of dollars at stake, the battles over the estates of the rich and famous can lead to some serious drama. This is the story of the rise and fall of legendary soul singer Marvin Gaye, whose golden voice brought him fame and fortune, and how, in the wake of his tragic death, his family fought for control of his financial and creative legacy. It's 1984, and the Prince of Soul, Marvin Gaye, is still basking in the success of his 1982 album, Midnight Love, which sold millions of copies, thanks in a large part to the multi-Grammy-winning hit single, Sexual Healing.
Sexual Healing was one of those songs that was everywhere when it came out. You would hear it in supermarkets, you would hear it pumping from car windows, at parties. Sexual Healing will become the biggest song of his career.
But despite the professional accolades, Marvin Gaye's personal life is in shambles.
Marvin Gaye suffered from depression and substance abuse, and he actually tried to take his life several times.
The superstar singer moves back in with his parents, Alberta and Marvin Sr. Marvin Gaye had bought the home for his parents and siblings back in 1975 for $30,000.
He was very, very emotionally imbalanced. He needed help. He called his mother. His mother was there to help him.
Gaye was very close to his mother, but his relationship with his father is fraught.
Growing up, Marvin suffered from a ton of beatings at the hand of his own father. It didn't matter how successful he had gotten, it was never good enough in his father's eyes.
Father and son were both struggling with depression. While Marvin abused drugs, his father drank too much. On April 1st, 1984, their lifelong struggle explodes into tragedy.
Marvin Gaye tried to step in to an argument that his father was having with his mother.
They get into a fight, a fist fight, a brutal fight.
In that fight is when Marvin Gaye Sr. pulls out a gun and shoots his son.
Marvin Gaye is rushed to the hospital, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. He's pronounced dead just after 1 p.m.
He died one day before his 45th birthday.
I remember hearing the story that Marvin Gaye was shot and killed by his father in Los Angeles, and I couldn't believe it.
Marvin's father is taken into custody and charged.
What will happen to him? Will he be convicted of first-degree murder, or will he walk away a free man?
As Marvin Gaye's family grieves, questions about what he's left behind are raised.
When Marvin Gaye passes away, everyone's curious, what is in his estate? What's he worth? Well, when it comes to light, it's very concerning and frightening for his family. He left behind $9.2 million in debt.
That amount is comprised of $4.5 million owed to the IRS, including $600,000 in taxes to the state of California, $300,000 in back alimony to his second wife, Janice, and millions to other creditors.
How is this possible? I do not know.
At one time, Marvin owned a Beverly Hills home worth millions and an apartment in West Hollywood. But at the time of his death, the only property he owned was the house occupied by his parents. The 5,300 square foot Gramercy home has 5 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, and a guest house. Marvin's only real valuable asset is his vast intellectual property, which includes his music catalog, song royalties, and image rights, worth untold millions.
Who will own the rights to Marvin Gaye, the man, the music, after his death, to re-release songs, to release images, to make posters, to use his image and his likeness to sell products? So who will own it?
But family is shocked to discover that Marvin Gaye didn't have a will.
Dying without a will means the state and not the individual decides how the assets are distributed among the beneficiaries. In this particular case, with no will, the state stepped in and decides how the estate is divided up.
California Probate Code decides that Marvin's 3 children, Marvin Gaye III from his first marriage, and Frankie Christian and Nona Gaye from his second marriage, will share equally in their father's estate.
But what he left was millions of dollars in debt.
The estate needed to make money. How were they going to do this? Well, it all came to Marvin's intellectual property rights.
29 years after Gaye's death, those intellectual property rights will spark an infamous legal battle when his children accuse pop stars Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams of copying their father's music for their mega hit song Blurred Lines.
The Blurred Lines verdict was history-making.
Marvin Pence Gaye Jr. grew up in the projects of Washington, D.C. with mother Alberta, sisters Jean and Ziola, and brother Frankie.
Marvin Gaye was raised in a poor and religious household. His father was a preacher, but there was also a tremendous amount of conflict going on there.
From an early age, Marvin sings in his father's church and in high school performs with various doo-wop groups, where his soulful voice and stage presence win him accolades. Marvin sees music as the way out of a volatile home situation.
He now knew what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. So it was perfectly suited, especially with his abusive dad, to begin to think about finding a way out through music.
But at 17 years old, Marvin is forced to put his dream on hold when life at home becomes unbearable.
In those days, there weren't many places for a kid to go if you wanted to run away from home. You were either going to be out on the street or you're going into the military. Marvin Gaye opted for the military.
Marvin joins the U.S. Air Force as a basic airman, but refuses to follow orders and is soon discharged. He's now free to pursue music full-time.
Early rock and rollers like Bo Diddley and promoters like Harvey Fuqua, they all believed in him.
In 1959, Fuqua hires Marvin to be a member of his new vocal group, Harvey and the New Moonglows.
In the Moonglows, he'd even released a couple singles. They hadn't done very well, but his talent was really evident.
The New Moonglows soon disband, but knowing he has a potential star on his hands, Fuqua takes Marvin to the national epicenter of the black music scene.
Detroit was the hub for so much amazing music and creativity. All these amazing artists came straight out of Detroit. I mean, it's where Motown was created.
At the time, Motown Records is home to huge selling artists like Smokey Robinson and the Miracles and Mary Wells.
In the 60s, Motown was nicknamed Hitsville, USA. It was a place where every artist that came through seemed to become successful.
And that was largely due to the company's notorious founder and hitmaker, Berry Gordy.
Marvin was looking to get into the Motown world. Remember, his goal is to become a world-renowned singer and songwriter. And who better than Berry Gordy to do that for him?
Fuqua arranges for Marvin Gaye to perform at the Motown president's Christmas party.
Berry Gordy saw him singing at a party that Berry had thrown at his house and wound up buying his contract out from Harvey Fuqua.
Gordy starts the young musician at a salary of $5 per week, but Marvin profits in another, more personal way.
Marvin Gaye's connection to Motown was not just a creative and financial one. At the same party that he signed to Motown Records through, he meets Berry Gordy's sister, Anna, who would become his wife.
Anna Gordy, she was substantially older than he was, and she was also the sister of Berry Gordy. And many people wondered if that's why Marvin ended up with Anna in the first place.
And it was a pretty shrewd career move.
But Marvin's first singles for Motown failed to make waves on the charts.
Marvin's earliest singles are not very successful. So Berry Gordy wanted to make sure that he got himself 100% together before he put out his next record. Motown was like a laboratory for pop stars. That was exactly what Berry Gordy insisted that it be. It was like the old studio system in that way. They would teach you how to walk, how to talk, how to perform, how to dance, how to sing, how to be a pop star.
Gordy's boot camp eventually pays off.
Marvin Gaye begins to have a string of hits: Stubborn Kind of Fellow, Pride and Joy, Hitchhiker. He's selling tons of records, and he's greatly in demand. But it wasn't just his own hits that he was having. He was writing hits for other artists there.
But Marvin's success doesn't bring with it the payday one could expect from being a top-selling artist.
Marvin Gaye is only making $60 a week.
Berry Gordy was a shrewd businessman. Motown had all the power, and the artist had very little power.
It brought him into conflict with Berry Gordy that went on for virtually his entire career.
At the same time, Marvin's marriage is being tested. At 44 years old, Anna Gordy is unable to get pregnant.
Anna found out she could not have children, so they came up with a plan.
In 1965, Marvin and Anna adopt a child.
Marvin names his newly adopted son Marvin Gaye III.
The child was their niece's baby.
Anna Gordy's niece. She was only 15 years old.
There are a lot of rumors out there that Marvin Gaye Jr. was actually the father of his own adopted child.
But a new baby can't fix the growing rift in Marvin and Anna's relationship. His affairs with other women will eventually destroy his marriage and launch the sexy soul singer on the path to financial ruin.
He finds himself deeper and deeper in debt. He becomes more and more mentally imbalanced and using more and more drugs.
When Marvin Gaye is shot and killed in 1984, everyone is eager to understand the circumstances around the iconic singer's tragic death.
Marvin Gaye's murder is one of the great tragedies in all of pop music, mostly because he was killed by his own father.
After shooting his son, Marvin Gaye Sr. gets arrested for murder.
Everyone thought it was a clear-cut conviction. His dad, he had the handgun, he shoots him. You know, that's it.
But the trial will be much more complicated, with a shocking outcome that makes headlines around the world.
That wasn't enough. The fact that many people learned after the death that Marvin Gaye was in debt at the time of his death, that shocked people.
Unpaid taxes, bills, and alimony to his second wife Janice puts Gaye's estate in the hole for $9.2 million. His valuable music catalog is his main asset.
He had lots of songwriting credits, so he could earn money in perpetuity.
I Heard It Through the Grapevine and Sexual Healing. These are major blockbuster hits and have value after his death.
Since he died without a will, his entire estate is awarded to his 3 children.
Marvin Gaye III, Nona, and Frankie.
Their aunts, Marvin's sisters, Zeola and Jean, are shocked by the decision.
It's no secret that Marvin Gaye's sisters aren't happy the money by law was going on to Marvin Gaye's 3 children, not his sisters.
Zeola remarks on the court's decision. The bottom line is that they get everything and we don't get a dime. We try and live with that, but it is difficult. But the executors of Marvin's estate have bigger concerns.
Marvin was in debt to the tune of $9 million.
It was after his death that the personal representatives who were responsible for paying back the debts and executing on his estate were quite smart.
It all came down to Gaye's intellectual property rights.
Increased sales of his music and licensing of his image helps his children pay $7 million down on his $9.2 million debt. But their biggest payday will come almost 3 decades later, when the estate sues the songwriters and producers of the best-selling song of 2013 in the United States.
The song was called Blurred Lines, and it was a perfectly appropriate title.
Executors of Marvin's estate claim that Blurred Lines sounds too much like his 1977 song, Got to Give It Up.
It very much had the kind of vibe that was a Marvin Gaye vibe.
The Gaye family has a problem with it. In fact, they send a demand notice to Robin Thicke, Pharrell Williams, and T.I. saying that they have infringed on Gaye's copyrights.
Marvin Gaye built his entire music career on that unique vibe and soulful voice. Back in the mid-60s, Marvin releases a string of hit singles.
Marvin Gaye has a wall full of gold records, and he's in great demand as a live performer.
In 1965, Marvin's hit single, How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You, sells over 900,000 copies. But most of the money Marvin is generating is not going in his pocket. but to his record company, Motown.
The more successful Marvin Gaye became, the more frustrated he became with his relationship with Motown. He knew that his revenues were increasing, but he felt that the share that he was getting from Motown was not a fair share.
It appears Marvin's marriage to Motown president Berry Gordy's sister, Anna, doesn't get him any special treatment.
Berry Gordy exerted tremendous amounts of control over the artists at Motown.
When Marvin landed at Motown, he started at the bottom of the totem pole. He realized what the pecking order was.
Gordy's latest plans to cash in on Marvin Gaye's talent is to pair him up.
Berry Gordy was into mining everything possible that would sell a record. It was very common in those days for there to be male-female duets.
The singing partner Gordy chooses for Marvin is Tammy Terell.
And the magic that they created is unmatched.
Beginning in April 1967, the duo releases a string of #1 singles, including the now classic Ain't No Mountain High Enough.
To be successful, there needs to be a great chemistry. And certainly in the relationship between Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terell, the chemistry was very intense between the two.
To the point where people thought that they must be lovers. He always claimed that they were just friends.
A claim that many believe made his wife Anna jealous.
Anna was not happy about it, which is totally understandable.
But Marvin's partnership with Tammy Terell eventually ends in heartbreak.
One of the great tragedies in Marvin Gaye's life occurs in the late 60s, when he's on stage singing with his duet partner, Tammy Terell. She basically collapses in his arms. Nobody quite knows what's wrong with her, and it turns out shortly thereafter that she's diagnosed with a brain tumor.
And soon after, they find out that she doesn't have long to live.
Tammy Terell will eventually succumb to her illness and die in 1970.
Her illness and death was something that affected Marvin Gaye for the rest of his life and was probably responsible for the shift in his career.
It's a shift that will put him into direct conflict with his brother-in-law and Motown founder, Berry Gordy.
Marvin really had this song that he wanted to release, and Berry Gordy was completely against it.
That song is I Heard It Through the Grapevine.
But it was actually a song that Gordy did not want him to record because Gladys Knight and the Pips had recorded it and had done very well with it. Marvin Gaye didn't care. He felt that he could do something else with it, and he did.
And it turns into this huge hit.
At the time, it will be the best-selling single ever by Motown.
And the song ended up selling over 4 million copies.
Marvin Gaye made a great business decision.
But only for Motown and Berry Gordy.
You would think that Marvin Gaye would have been an extremely wealthy man after the success of I Heard It Through the Grapevine, but that was one of the tracks that he didn't write. And he didn't earn a lot of money from anything that he had released in that early period. And that was one of the things that brought him into conflict with Berry Gordy.
But Marvin continues to be undeterred by Gordy's misgivings.
Between 1968 and 1970, something changes for Marvin Gaye. There was an enormous shift in consciousness at the end of the 1960s, socially and politically, and Marvin Gaye was all about that. He'd been greatly inspired by other artists from the late 60s and, of course, by politicians, by Martin Luther King and many others. He was determined to make a very personal statement about the world and himself in it.
That song and album would be What's Going On.
Berry Gordy did not want to release What's Going On. He felt it was too weird and too political. Marvin Gaye decided he would never record another note for Motown unless they did release it.
Marvin's threat pays off.
Marvin really trusted his instincts, What's Going On, and it becomes not only a huge political hit, but also a massive commercial hit.
Released in 1971, What's Going On goes on to sell over 3 million copies, making it the biggest-selling album of all time in Motown's history.
And it's proven to be one of the most timeless record releases in the history of pop music.
Its success gives Marvin the power to negotiate a new deal with Motown Records for $1 million, making it the most lucrative deal by any black recording artist at the time. Marvin now has the freedom to put some of his hard-earned money to work.
And he had people trying to get him to invest in various ventures, and one of them Marvin took up, and that was the famous cookie line.
He invested $10,000.
Over the next few years, Marvin's cookie investment will be really sweet for him financially.
In 1970, they had sold over $300,000 in cookies. And by 1982, the company's revenue was over $12 million. That number, in comparison to what Marvin had initially invested, it's astounding.
But no matter how successful Marvin is financially or creatively, it will never be enough for his father, Marvin Sr.
After the success of What's Going On in the early 70s, Marvin Gaye decides to reconnect with his roots. He moves back to DC and he tries to repair the relationship with his father, figuring that he's probably in a better position now. He has credibility, he's successful, he has money. He even brings a suitcase filled with $1 million to show his dad. He opens it right in front of him, and his dad basically just turns his nose up at it, unimpressed. The fact that Marvin Gaye still needed to impress his father tells you everything that you know about him and about their relationship.
Many believe Marvin's tortured relationship with his father is a factor in his growing addiction.
And he began dabbling, as many artists do, in self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. I mean, coke was the main thing. Through the 70s, that gets worse.
Marvin also has an insatiable appetite for women.
I don't think it's well known how different Marvin Gaye, the artist, was from Marvin Gaye, the person. He's this beautiful, skilled songwriter with a voice like an angel. In his interpersonal relationships and with himself, he's a drug abuser and he's a cheater. Just 2 years into a marriage, Marvin Gaye was cheating on his wife.
Marvin having a mistress would obviously upset Anna.
In 1973, his 12-year marriage is put to the ultimate test when Marvin begins recording what one writer proclaims one of the most sexually charged albums ever recorded.
Let's Get It On will become a signature album for Marvin.
And its highly suggestive single will go to #1 on the Billboard Pop Singles chart, eventually selling more than 4 million copies.
The most important thing that came out of those sessions was Janice. Marvin described Janice Hunter as an inspiration during the recording of Let's Get It On. No doubt she was.
She was a 17-year-old go-go dancer.
Marvin ended up having 2 kids with Janice. The problem? Marvin Gaye was still married to Anna Gordy, and she was not happy about it.
5 years later, Anna files for divorce, and she expects Marvin to pay.
The problem is, Marvin doesn't really have a lot of money.
Years of financial mismanagement left Marvin Gaye practically broke.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the financial hole that Marvin Gaye digs for himself.
He had the IRS breathing down his neck as well.
After iconic soul singer Marvin Gaye is shot and killed by his father on April 1st, 1984, the media is wild with speculation on the events leading up to his death. When Marvin Gaye Sr. appears before the judge, his plea is a shock to many.
After Marvin Gaye Sr. shoots his son, Marvin Gaye Jr., he immediately argues self-defense. He also argues that he believes that the gun did not even have real bullets in it. But you'd have to question why someone who thought there weren't real bullets in a gun would shoot 3 times. So that's not a very credible argument.
The singer's mother, Alberta, is the sole witness in the shooting. When she files for divorce before the trial, many see that as an indication that it was no accident. But others choose to believe Marvin Gaye Sr.'s claim of self-defense.
Marvin had a very challenging relationship with his dad. They had a past of abuse, altercations, beatings.
In the weeks leading up to his death, Marvin Gaye and his father were increasingly at odds, and the singer's mental health was precarious.
He abused drugs. He still had debts. He was mentally imbalanced. He was depressed.
In the past, Marvin Gaye's depression had led to suicide attempts.
The first time he used a handgun, or at least he tried to before Berry Gordy stopped him. The second time, he ingested a full ounce of cocaine, thinking it would kill him, but it didn't. And then the week of his death, he jumped out of a moving car, but somehow he only sustained minor injuries. There were rumors that Marvin wanted his dad to kill him.
As Marvin Sr. awaits trial for the murder, family members deal with another tragedy. Marvin Gaye has left behind an enormous debt of $9.2 million.
The family had to regroup, not only from the enormous debt, but Marvin Gaye wasn't with them any longer. The patriarch of the family was in jail charged with his murder. So all of those created a very precarious situation for the family. Several family members and the mother are still in the house, and the big question is everybody going to be able to stay there now that it's discovered that Marvin's really in $9 million of debt?
Marvin III and his lawyers look for creative ways of generating income to pay back Marvin's debts.
His personal representatives who were responsible for paying back the debts and executing on his estate, they were able to sell intellectual property, copyrights, a little bit of Marvin Gaye's likeness and images to get money in, to pay off those debts, and to also leave money for alimony and child support.
But it will be the contentious sale of Marvin's life story that causes a legal battle between its buyers and Marvin's creditors.
The estate decided to sell the rights to his life story. They start talking with Motown Records, but some of the creditors have a problem with this because they think that they won't get paid.
One of those creditors is Harvey Fuqua, who contends that Gaye never paid him the $450,000 for producing his 1983 U.S. tour.
Ultimately, the sale did go to Motown Records, and they were the ones who got the rights, but it would still take years for the creditors to be paid off.
Marvin Gaye's money problems began to emerge in the early 1970s, even after signing a record-breaking $1 million deal with Motown Records.
He was spending a fortune. Marvin Gaye buys a Tudor mansion in Los Angeles, a mansion that he really can't afford at that time, but no one in his family cares because they all decide they're going to move in, including his parents.
In the early 70s, Marvin also purchases a $1 million apartment in West Hollywood. But an extramarital affair will set him on a path of financial ruin.
Janice Hunter was the other woman in Marvin Gaye's life.
And then he adds insult to injury by buying a house with Janice and then having 2 kids with her while he's still married to Anna.
Frankie and Nona's birth is too much for Anna. In 1975, she files for divorce.
Anna Gordy is looking for $1 million, and it's $1 million that he doesn't have. He winds up coming up with $600,000 for her and borrows the rest against his future recording deal.
Of course, in order for Anna to fully collect the proceeds from the divorce, Marvin Gaye's album had to do well because she was banking on the album doing well in order to get paid.
In October 1977, Marvin marries Janice in New Orleans and soon after hits the studio to record what will be his payback album. Released in 1978, Marvin's double album, Here, My Dear, would be a chronicle of his divorce from Anna.
Marvin Gaye was making albums based off his divorce from Anna Gordy. Hilarious, if you ask me.
But nobody is laughing when it becomes his first critical and financial flop.
This was definitely a financial setback for Marvin. Of course, Anna was just one of the creditors he was going to have to contend to. He had the IRS breathing down his neck as well.
It turns out Marvin has failed to pay up to $2 million in federal taxes.
He's just finding himself more and more financial trouble, so he files for bankruptcy.
His bankruptcy filing reveals just how bad it is. His unsecured debts are estimated to be nearly $7 million.
I mean, this is someone who liked to spend a lot of money. Drugs, lavish lifestyles, you name it.
His life begins spiraling out of control, impacting his already turbulent marriage to Janice.
Marvin and Jan's relationship really was crumbling, becoming more and more scary for Jan. Jan speaks to very many violent acts in the marriage. He held a knife to her throat. He also wanted her to engage in sex acts with other men while he was present.
In 1981, Janice files for divorce.
Janice may not have gotten a lot of money from the divorce with Marvin Gaye because he didn't have much money, but Janice didn't let that stop her from making money off of him. In fact, she ended up writing a tell-all book and lined her pockets with that.
In deep financial trouble, Marvin searches for a way out.
He decides to leave Motown, and he puts his lot in with CBS Records in the hope that his career can enjoy a reboot. CBS Records comes in and buys out his contract for $2 million, which is money that he can use to begin to get himself back on his feet and negotiate with the IRS.
In 1981, he embarks on a European tour, netting him $60,000. But he can't seem to kick his old self-destructive ways.
He becomes more and more mentally imbalanced and using more and more drugs. He's dying here. He's killing himself with drugs.
The struggling singer gets a lifeline when club owner and concert promoter Freddie Coussert invites the singer to stay with him in Ostend, Belgium.
He finds the lifestyle there so serene and calm. He almost, in a way, he finds peace.
With Coussert's encouragement, Marvin vows to turn his life around. With a commitment to daily exercise and renewed commitment to his Christian faith.
Marvin Gaye's life was saved in Belgium.
And in 1982, it leads to a song that resurrects his music career.
Marvin Gaye's reboot does happen, and it happens spectacularly. He's recorded an album and a single called Sexual Healing, which will become the biggest song of his career.
The single spends 19 weeks at #1 and goes on to sell 2 million copies. Marvin's accompanying album, Midnight Love, is equally successful. peaking in the top 10 of the Billboard 200, eventually selling 3 million in the US and over 6 million copies worldwide.
You would hear sexual healing everywhere because it was provocative and it was totally on brand for Marvin Gaye and it was sexy.
In 1982, Marvin returns to the US from Europe when his mother Alberta needs surgery for a kidney infection.
That feeling of peace that Marvin achieved while living in Belgium didn't last long because when he came back to the United States, all his old demons returned. He still had debts. He was still very, very mentally imbalanced. He was depressed. He starts using drugs again, and his life starts going downhill again.
In 1983, Marvin moves in with his parents in the LA home he purchased for them. But even under his mother Alberta's care, Marvin's mental stability steadily worsens.
Marvin Gaye becomes worried for his safety. Whether this was paranoia from drugs, nobody can ever really know, but he winds up buying a gun.
It will be the one that his father, Marvin Sr., will kill him with only a few months later. When superstar soul singer Marvin Gaye is shot and killed by his own father in 1984, the trial makes headlines. The events leading up to Marvin Gaye's death are soon revealed when his father appears before a judge.
All right, the matter of Marvin Gaye Sr. Matters here for arraignment and plea.
He argues that he was physically assaulted by Marvin Gaye and that he was only protecting himself.
Police reports appear to support his claim.
His dad actually had physical bruises all over his body, so it wasn't just one-sided.
Marvin's autopsy reveals that at the time of his death, he had several illicit drugs in his system, including cocaine and PCP, a drug known to cause hallucinations and violent behavior.
Marvin was talking to his mom in their Gramercy home, and while he was talking to his mom, his dad barged in, and they had a big, big fight.
Marvin Sr. alleges that in an act of desperation, he exited the bedroom to obtain the gun Marvin purchased several months earlier.
Marvin's dad had the gun in hand, and while Marvin was on PCP and acting wild, his dad ended up shooting him.
The only way that Marvin Gaye Sr. believed he could keep Marvin off of him was to shoot him, and he shot him with the gun that Marvin Gaye had purchased.
The sole witness, Marvin's mother, Alberta, corroborates her husband's account. In the end, there will be no murder trial.
Court will enter a plea of not guilty for Mr. Gaye.
There is a plea deal. He pleads guilty to a lesser offense. He pleads guilty to manslaughter and is sentenced only to 5 years probation.
During his sentencing, Marvin Sr.'s lawyer reads a statement on behalf of his client.
Mr. Gaye is extremely sorry for what happened. Mr. Gaye has had to live with this and will have to live with this for the rest of his life.
Obviously, he was sorry. He killed his son. He wished he could have taken that moment back, but he couldn't.
News of the verdict is met with shock and disbelief from Marvin Gaye's fans, struggling to reconcile how their idol with the smooth, velvety voice was in fact a deeply troubled man.
So for me, I'm a huge fan of Marvin Gaye, the artist. I love all of his music. However, when I look at who Marvin Gaye is as the person, how he treated his wives, how he treated his family member, even how he treated himself, it's very hard for me to see him as the same man who writes all that beautiful music. I just almost can't connect the two.
Marvin Gaye left behind sizable debts in the amount of $9.2 million. In subsequent years, his appointed executor, eldest son Marvin III, and his estate lawyers are able to pay off a sizable amount. But they can't eradicate it all.
Marvin Gaye's estate needed to get out of debt. There was $9 million of creditor claims to pay. And of course, they wanted to make money for his beneficiaries, his children.
The singer's estate finds a way many years after his death, when they launch a controversial copyright battle that will make headlines around the world.
29 years after Marvin Gaye passes away, the real estate war begins. In fact, when the song Blurred Lines is released, the Gaye family has a problem with it.
They claim that Blurred Lines sounds too much like one of Marvin Gaye's songs. In 2013, Robin Thicke's song, co-written and produced by Pharrell Williams and rapper T.I., is a huge international hit, with 10 million in sales in the US alone.
The song that was claimed to be infringed upon, the Marvin Gaye song, was Gotta Give It Up. It was a very dancing number that Marvin recorded in the late 70s.
When they heard the similarity between the two songs, they weren't gonna sit idly by and let this happen. It was a huge hit. So Pharrell, T.I., Robin Thicke, they're making millions off the song. The estate filed a copyright violation lawsuit.
This lawsuit causes every major musician or artist to essentially freak out. This is a big deal.
The lawsuit's claim is unprecedented.
Now, typically, when you're talking about suing an artist for copyright infringement, whether you're suing a songwriter or you're suing a recording artist, you're talking about copying or nicking the words and the melody. That's what a song actually is. In the case against Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams, what had actually been lifted was the vibe, that Marvin Gaye's vibe, whatever that means.
Many artists fear that if Marvin's estate is victorious, it will have a chilling financial effect on the music industry.
What everyone in the industry was worried about is that creative people would stop being so creative because they would worry that they were going to then be accused of copying someone else's work, and then would either have to give up royalties or be involved in litigation.
This was major. The Go-Go's, the Black Crowes, even the major composer Hans Zimmer, they were all rallying behind the defendants.
With millions on the line, Thicke, Williams, and T.I. decide to fight back.
So Thicke, Williams, and T.I. have a strategy. They file a preemptive lawsuit asking the court to make a decision that they haven't infringed on the copyrights. They claim that they're two totally different songs. It leads to a 7-day trial. Pharrell Williams and Robin Thicke admit to the court that they were inspired by Marvin Gaye's hit, but it doesn't mean that they copied it.
After 2 days of deliberations, on March 10, 2015, the jury reaches its verdict.
There was a lot of tension. Everyone wanted to know what was going to happen. This verdict was going to affect a lot of people. The verdict comes down in the Gaye family favor. In fact, they awarded a $7.4 million verdict. But this verdict wouldn't stand. The court ended up reducing it to $5.3 million.
In addition to the $5 million that they had to pay, they also have to pay 50% of all the royalties that Blurred Lines is earning and going to continue to earn. This is a lot of money for the Marvin Gaye estate.
The win means Marvin Gaye's massive debt is cleared, and the once cash-poor estate is now flush. But who will actually benefit from the windfall launches a new estate battle between Marvin Gaye's heirs and his extended family. And the estate's legal battles will be far from over.
Because of the precedent set with the Blurred Lines verdict, now there are other individuals being sued, including Ed Sheeran.
At this point, every songwriter has to be looking over their shoulder, wondering who'll be coming for them next.
For years after his tragic death at the hands of his own father, Marvin Gaye's heirs searched for opportunities to decrease the singer's massive $9.2 million debt. His sons Marvin III and Frankie and daughter Nona are able to reduce the debt by licensing their father's most valuable asset, his intellectual property.
Marvin Gaye's estate has proven to be very aggressive in protecting both the copyright and the legacy of Marvin Gaye.
Intellectual property varies in value. Usually, for an artist like Marvin Gaye, it's going to increase over time because he had lots of songwriting credits. He had sold a ton of records.
During his career, Marvin wrote over 80 songs. Over the years, the family managed to pay back $7 million owed to the IRS and creditors. But their biggest payday comes on March 10, 2015, when a jury awards them $7.4 million for copyright infringement on Marvin's song Got to Give It Up.
I feel free from, honestly, free from Pharrell Williams and Robin Thicke's chains and the lies that were told, and the fact that we were able to break through anyway.
The Blurred Lines verdict was history-making. This was a huge copyright violation case involving huge players in the industry.
They actually gave credit to the fact that Marvin Gaye had created a certain vibe or atmosphere that they had nicked, and that is a completely new finding. They actually gave the victory in court to the Marvin Gaye estate, which absolutely shocked the industry.
The court would eventually reduce the damages owed to the Gaye estate to $5.3 million. The family, which includes Marvin's second wife, Janice, were awarded half of Blurred Lines' royalties.
This must have been gratifying for the family. All of a sudden, they had avenged their father's legacy. He was getting credit for what he had done and who was using his music. And it also didn't hurt that now they had some money.
Marvin Gaye's two sisters, Zeola and Jean, were left out in the cold when he died without a will and are hopeful the verdict will change their fortunes as well, especially since Zeola actually sang on Got to Give It Up. The song the estate claimed was copied by Blurred Lines.
The sisters had an interest, a very big financial interest, in Marvin Gaye's estate.
But the sisters, who've been living in severely reduced circumstances, are let down again, receiving nothing from the settlement. Zeola tells the Daily Mail, "Marvin would have hated to have seen us like this. He would have cared for us and made sure we were fine financially and with love." Zeola blames the decision on ex-wife Janice. She claims that she has shut out the sisters since Marvin's death, even banning them from performing his music. But Janice fires back, accusing them of being, quote, desperate. In June 2020, Gaye's estate launches another copyright infringement suit.
Because of the precedent set with the Blurred Lines verdict, now there are other individuals being sued, including Ed Sheeran. His estate is claiming that Ed Sheeran's song, Thinking Out Loud, infringes on the copyright of Let's Get It On. In fact, Ed Sheeran is being sued by Ed Townsend's estate. Who is Ed Townsend? Well, he was an individual who co-wrote Let's Get It On with Marvin Gaye. His estate is claiming that Ed Sheeran's song, Thinking Out Loud, infringes on the copyright. They're suing for $100 million in damages.
The legal precedent originally set by the Blurred Lines victory has encouraged a slew of other similar copyright disputes.
And there was a lot of copyright litigation after this because lesser-known artists decided, hey, you know what? If Marvin Gaye could get this money in a big lawsuit, well, certainly if we little artists have our work copied, we should get the money from the big players. And there were a whole tide of lawsuits. As recently as Katy Perry's lawsuit in Dark Horse and the Led Zeppelin lawsuit for Stairway to Heaven.
But one important thing these legal battles have made clear, although it's been over 3 decades since his tragic death, Marvin Gaye's name, iconic image, and of course, his influential music can still generate headlines around the world.
Marvin Gaye was a singer, songwriter, and social activist. Not only that, but one of the most important artists in the history of popular music. The thing about Marvin Gaye's music was it was timeless. You can still listen to them today and feel what he was feeling when he recorded them.
What I love about Marvin Gaye is you listen to his music and it brings you to a certain time. The 60s and 70s, it's really good music. He knew how to work it on stage and he definitely knew how to put on a show.